Okay, good afternoon, Rabbi Isai. Shalom Aleichem, Rucham Abba. We're continuing our series of Monday morning Shiurim. Rucham Abba to the Kolel Agar de Perka. And we have an amazing topic today. The subject is Parsha's Korach and the power of bikur cholim, the amazing power of the tefillah of every Jew. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Nedarim Daf Lamed Tes Amar Reish Lakish Remez lebikur cholim min Torah minayin. Where is there an allusion to the mitzvah of bikur cholim? You know, you would have expected, I don't know, maybe the Avram Avinu, when Avram Avinu was sick and Hashem came to visit Avram Avinu, or maybe a different source. The Gemara brings an amazing source. Amar Reish Lakish Remez lebikur cholim min Torah minayin shenemer. Moshe Rabbeinu says, if these guys, Korach and his cohorts, die like all men, ufekudas kal adam yipaked, and if they're visited by the visitation of all men, meaning, what is Moshe Rabbeinu telling HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Does Moshe Rabbeinu say, look, prove to the world that I am correct and Korach is wrong? Because if Korach is right, then he will turn into a pumpkin. No, that's not what Hashem says. That's not what Moshe says. The Moshe say if Korach is wrong, he'll turn into a watermelon. No. Moshe says, if he dies the death of a regular man and he is visited by the visitation of all men, says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Im kamois kol ha'adam yimusan eila. If Korach dies the death of all of mankind, shehem cholim, most people ultimately they become ill, umutalim ba'arisasan, and they're placed in their sick bed, uvnei adam mevakrim oisam, and people come to visit them. Ma habriyos oimrim, what will people say? Loi Hashem shalachani lazeh, God did not send me. Says Moshe Rabbeinu to Hashem, the siman that Korach is right is not only if he dies a regular natural death, but if he becomes sick and people are mevaker choila. But if he dies an unnatural death and people are not mevaker choila, that shows, says Moshe Rabbeinu, that I am correct. So the barometer, the test to determine, is Korach a fraud or am I the fraud, says Moshe, is if people come to be mavaker choyle Korach. Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't just say, if Korach dies naturally, then Korach was correct. And if he dies unnaturally, then I'm correct. Moshe Rabbeinu hinges it on the mitzvah of bikur cholim. If Korach dies naturally and people are mavaker choyle, then I'm a fraud. But if he dies unnaturally and people are not mavaker choyle, then Korach is a fraud. How in the world is bikur cholim the barometer to determine the authenticity or lack thereof of Korach? This question is raised by the Marsha in the Marsha's second edition of Marsha Masechta Nedarim called Madura Basra, second edition. When I was a bacher, I used to think Madura Basra was the sefer. The Marsha wrote a sefer called Madura Basra. Madura Basra means last edition. It means another edition of the Marsha. The Marsha asks in Masechta Shabbos Daf Yud Beis and Beis V'Kasha, B'mai haya nira shalai asa midaite b'shvil sh'bnei adam mevaker noisai. How does the fact that people visit Korach show that he didn't do it on his own? V'oid mai mida keneged mida zeh yesh shenivlu chayim la'aretz. What exactly is the mida keneged mida that Korach will be swallowed by the ground? How is bikur cholim the barometer to determine the authenticity or lack thereof of Korach? Let's begin with the Gemara Nedarim and Daf Mem. The Gemara Nedarim tells us a story. There's a story with a student of Rabbi Akiva who became sick, and the Chachamim did not come to be mevaker him, and Rabbi Akiva came to be mevaker him, and because Rabbi Akiva swept, and in the olden days they had dirt floors, so you have to sprinkle water on the dirt floor so that the dust settles. Because Rabbi Akiva was mevaker him, and he swept, and he put water on the floor, chaya, the student lived. Amar lei, Amar le Rabbi Hechi Yisani. Rabbi said, I'm sorry, the student said, Rabbi Hechi Yisani, Rabbi Kiva, you kept me alive. You gave me life. Yatsa Rabbi Akiva v'darash. Rabbi Akiva went out and he expounded. Kol mi she'ein mevaker cholim. Anyone who's not mevaker chola, ki'ilu shoifech damim. It's like he spilled blood. You think if you're not mevaker chola, all you're doing is a lack of a positive command? No, it's more than that. It's more severe than that. Anyone who is not mevaker chola, it's like they were shoifech damim. It's like they spilled blood, because literally a bikur cholim could give somebody life. When Rav Dimi came, Rav Dimi said, anyone who's mevaker chola, he causes the person to live, and anyone who's not mevaker chola causes a person to die. So Gemara asks, how does he cause a person to die? Does it mean someone who's mevaker chola, he davens for them to live, and someone who's not mevaker chola davens for the person to die? Really? If you're not mevaker chola, it's because you're sitting at home saying Shiram holiest mimamakim, and then you make a mishaber chavasein Abraham Yitzchak Yaakov who yemis sachola. Heaven forbid that somebody would daven for someone to die. So Gemara says no. Ela kol she'ein mevaker chola. Basically, the Gemara says that somebody's mevaker chola, he causes the person to live because he davens for them to live. But someone who's not mevaker chola, he doesn't daven for the person to live, and therefore he has to consider it as if he caused the person to die. So from here we learn a very important facet of bikur cholim, and that is davening for the chola. Part of the mitzvah of bikur cholim is davening for the chola, which means, perhaps, that if somebody visited someone and he bought them balloons and flowers and chocolate and a get well card and a newspaper and did not daven for the person, are they mekayim the mitzvah? As we're going to see, they do not fulfill the mitzvah properly. They're lacking in the fulfillment of the mitzvah. So you say, then why do I need to visit them to daven for them? I'll just make a list in my rifa'inu and I'll add them to the list. What connection is there between visiting the person and davening for the person? So let's explore this a little bit. In Yeridea we find that one should not be mevaker chola in the first 3 hours of the day. Yeridea Siman Shin Nun Hey Siv Dalet, because in the first 3 hours of the day the illness eases off, and if you visit in the first 3 hours, the guy's going to be sprightly, the guy's going to be energetic, and you're not going to daven for them. Don't visit someone in the last 3 hours of the day, because then the illness is very heavy, and you're going to think the person is in a desperate situation, and you're not going to be mevaker, you're mevakesh rachamim. You're going to think it's all hope is lost. Says Rama, v'chol shabiker v'loy bikesh of rachamim loy kiyem hamitzvah. You could drive to the city, you could schmooze with them for 4 hours, you could buy them balloons, cards, candy, chocolate, and you just one thing, you didn't daven for them, you don't get the mitzvah. Davening for the chola is part of the mitzvah bikur cholim. So Chafetz Chaim has a very interesting question. You know, on the winter days where the day is less than 6 hours, and you don't visit someone in the first 3 hours, you don't visit someone in the last 3 hours, so when exactly are you supposed to visit the person? So the Chafetz Chaim says, first of all, the hours are sha'os manios. Okay? So if there are only 6 hours in the day, so then it's a half hour. The first hour and a half you don't visit them. The last hour and a half you don't visit them. However, if you're pressed for time, and if you don't visit them in the short window that is recommended, you won't be able to visit. The only time you have to visit is either in the first 3 hours or in the last 3 hours. Then certainly it's better to visit them in the first or last 3 hours than not to visit them at all. Because at least you'll be able to sweep the floor and clean the floor. Now, so far we're seeing there are two key elements of bikur cholim. Number one, cleaning the area around the chayla. And you should know you could go to the best hospitals and they have the most sanitary conditions. There's always garbage near the chayla. There's always trash on his thing, on the bed. You can lick off the floors, but there's always garbage around the chayla. And that's the first chelek of the mitzvah. The second chelek of the mitzvah is to daven for them. And therefore it's best to schedule it during not the first 3 hours, the last 3 hours. In the Sefer Chut HaMeshulash, which is the official biography on Rabbi Kiva and the Chassam Sofer, and this is a very important Sefer. It's not just a storybook. Chazon Ish says every home should have the Sefer Chut HaMeshulash, the official biography of the Chassam Sofer. He says when it comes to the mitzvah bikur cholim, the Rabbi Kiva Eger was very attached to the mitzvah bikur cholim. If he would hear that someone became ill, he would come to visit, he would bring him tasty food to restore his spirit, and it was very pleasing to a sick person that Rabbi Kiva Eger made it his business to visit the person. And very often Rabbi Kiva Eger would sleep next to the chayla, and the Rabbi Kiva Eger would try to get the good doctors for the chayla. Rabbi Kiva Eger would ask for the chayla's name and the name of his mother, and he would daven for him. And Rabbi Kiva Eger would do this daily. Nothing would stop him. And this was the practice of Rabbi Kiva Eger in the city of Pazna. Can one be mekayim the mitzvah bikur cholim over the telephone? So this was brought to the attention of Moshe Feinstein in Egros Moshe Yardei Chelek Aleph Siman Reish Chaf Gimel. Through the telephone, the questioner wanted to say, well, obviously you won't be able to sweep and you won't be able to wash the floor. Well, there are aspects of the mitzvah you should be able to do. You are able to do. Namely, you could daven for the person. So Rav Moshe says, look, even though you do get a mitzvah if you call a chayla, but you can't say you're yoytze yedei chayvasai, because you're missing a lot of things. You're missing washing the floor, you're missing sprinkling water on the floor. The only thing you get is if you're not able to travel to the chayla, let's say the chayla is in a different country. So you're not completely exempt, but you have to be mevaker him, l'chal ha'pachos, in whatever aspects of bikur cholim you're able to do. The questioner wanted to say, well, the main part of bikur cholim is davening, and that you definitely could fulfill on the telephone. So Rav Moshe said, no, you can't. If you were able to fulfill the aspect of davening just by calling someone on the phone, then why would you ever have to go visit someone? Ask their family how they are and daven for them in shul. It must be, in order to properly daven for somebody, you need to see their condition with your own eyes. Until you see the condition of the chayla, nothing the family tells you will impact your emotions to daven in a heartfelt way. In other words, in order to properly fulfill your obligation of tefillah, you need to see their condition in the first hand. And even, obviously washing the floor, you have to be there. Now, by the way, there is a difference between davening and cleaning the floor. Davening, nobody else could do it. Even though other people could daven, but nobody could daven your tefillah. But let's say cleaning the floor, if someone else will do it, then you don't have to do it. Now, here's another amazing tshuva from Moshe about the mitzvah bikur cholim. And in this tshuva we learned something really remarkable. Rav Moshe says, I know a lot of people probably question me. That a lot of people ask me, they come to my house, they ask me to pray for this choila or for this tzara, or that I should give them a bracha for health, or for children, or for parnasa, or for hatzlacha and Torah, or whatever they need. And Rav Moshe says, I do it. and I mavarich them, and I daven for them. Says Rav Moshe, even though I know my my small value in Torah and a masim tovim, and look, you see Rav Moshe's genuine humility. He says, probably people wonder, why do I just daven for cholim or give brachos to people? Who do I think I am that I consider myself so righteous that I just daven for people? I know how unworthy I am. I know other Gedolei Torah that are greater than me, that when people go to them for a bracha, or people go to them that to ask them to daven for them, they say, what are you coming to me? Go to somebody else. So Rav Moshe says, I know it appears somewhat arrogant. So Rav Moshe continues. He says, we know the ikar mitzvah bikur cholim is not to clean the floors, is not to make the cholah feel thought about. The ikar mitzvah of bikur cholim is to daven for the cholah. Yeah, the ikar mitzvah of bikur cholim is to daven for the cholah. Like we learned in the Gemara Nedarim, that when Reb Dimi said that if somebody visits the cholah, if somebody has an eraser, if you could just erase these red marks on the Maramakoimos kindly, that the Gemara says that if somebody visits the cholah, they cause them to live, and if somebody is not able to visit the cholah, they cause them to die, because tefillah is a very critical part of the mitzvah of bikur cholim. And you shouldn't visit the cholah in the first 3 hours or the last 3 hours. So we see from here that the tefillah and the bracha of every single person, even simple people, even people who might be sinners, is very important. Think about it. We say that anyone who is not mevaker cholah is causing the person to die, and anyone who's mevaker cholah causes the person to live. So imagine like this. Imagine the whole Mayatzes Gedolei HaTorah went to visit a cholah. Now, I'm sitting at home. I want to know, should I go be mevaker cholah? Yeah, we say, don't you know the Gemara Nedarim? If you don't go to be mevaker cholah, you're causing the guy to die. Why am I causing the guy to die? Because you could daven for him. I should daven for him? He just had 9 Gedolei Yisrael daven for him. Why am I obligated to visit him? Must be that even though this guy was visited by the Mayatzes Gedolei HaTorah in America, the Mayatzes Gedolei HaTorah in Eretz Yisrael, the Shas Mayatzes Gedolei HaTorah of the Sfardim, you could have the Gedolei Chasidus, still a regular Jew still has an obligation of bikur cholim. Why? Because who knows? You never know. Maybe his tefillah will be the tefillah that will be niskabel. Even though all the Gedolei Yisrael, all the Admoirim, all the Rosh Yeshivas, all the Rabbanim, 5,000 great people visited this person. I'm mechuyev to visit, because maybe my tefillah will make the difference. So what do we learn from here? The incredible power of the tefillah of every individual Jew. Everyone needs to say that maybe my tefillah will make the state of Israel safe. Maybe my tefillah will win the war. Maybe my tefillah will heal the cholah. Maybe my tefillah will help that person find a shidduch. Nobody knows whose tefillah it will take to change the course of history. Sometimes a person knows somebody who's waiting for a shidduch, or who's a cholah, or sometimes even in the situation in Eretz Yisrael, and a person says, oh, they're saying Tehillim, okay, good, let them say Tehillim, I'm going to run off. Every person has to think that maybe, who knows, maybe it's going to be my sincere tefillah that will make the difference. And therefore, every single Jew has an obligation to be mevaker cholah, because it could be their tefillah will make the difference, and if they are not mevaker cholah, then the Gemara says it's tantamount like you caused the guy to die. Even simple people, even people who sin sometimes, could be very effective. Even individuals, because there is no obligation to do bikur cholim with a minyan. Rav Moshe even says it's better not to go with a group of people. This is not an activity to do with your cronies, like say, hey Yankel, hey Feivel, what are you doing today? I don't know, hey, yesterday we went bowling, today we're going to go be mavaker choyle. No. Bikur cholim, you do it yourself. Nobody likes to be visited by a group of people. This is not like a chevra thing. Rav Moshe says that there's no chiyuv to visit with 10 people, and it's better to say it's usur to visit a choila with a lot of people. The reason is each individual, even a stam person, even a sinner, and even someone who doesn't care about sinning, his tefillah might be accepted. So therefore, says Rav Moshe, if someone asks you to daven for them, even if you're a simple guy, and you're not zohar in mitzvahs, and even if you're an over avera, if you're mamin b'Hashem yisbarach, whether somebody asks you bal peh, or someone asks you b'ksav, you need to daven for the person, because maybe Hashem will be concerned for your tefillah and your bracha for whatever reason, because Hashem remembers and knows the machshava of every single person. Maybe this person who's an oiver avera, he has a certain zchus, and because of that zchus, his tefillah will be accepted. And also, the fact that if someone asks you to daven and you feel pain that that person is b'tzar, and you're mekayim by feeling pain for him, v'ahavta l'recha kamoicha, that is a very powerful zechus to have your tefillah answered. Therefore, says Rav Moshe, since there's an obligation that if somebody asks you to daven or give you a bracha, even though you already know about their difficult situation, Rav Moshe says, since there's a chiyuv to daven for someone, even if you weren't asked to daven, you just know about their situation. You hear this? You know somebody is sick. You know somebody needs a zivug. You know somebody, whatever they need. Needs some parnasa, needs chizuk. You have an obligation to daven for them. Certainly if they ask you. So therefore Rav Moshe says people ask. So Rav Moshe says if somebody asks you to daven for them, you have an obligation to daven for them. And even if they don't ask you, you have an obligation to daven for them. So therefore, if people ask me to pray for them, or to be mispalel, to be mavarich them, I do it. So now Rav Moshe says, but the reason why people ask me to daven for them is because they think I'm a Talmid Chacham. So maybe it's not a valid, maybe I shouldn't daven for them because they're asking me under a false pretense, because I know that I'm not really such a Chacham. Says Rav Moshe, what do you want me to tell them? I should tell them I'm not such a Talmid Chacham? That's just going to make things worse. The more I try to tell them that I'm not a Talmid Chacham, the more not only are they going to think I am, they're going to also think I'm an anav. So it's just going to make matters worse. They're going to ask me more. So I'm better to keep my mouth closed and let them think I'm a Talmid Chacham than to try to convince them otherwise, even though I know I'm not a Talmid Chacham. And Rav Moshe says, look, the reality is, I have a yeshiva, and I give shiurim, and I wrote svarim, so I guess I am a chacham. Even though I'm very far from what the Gemara says in Rabbi Pinchas ben Chama, that if somebody has a chayla b'teich beisai, they should go to a chacham. And I'm very far from such a chacham, and I'm far from the chachamim of hundreds of years ago. I'm even far from the chachamim of the times of the Gaonim. Says Rav Moshe, could be it's good enough to have a chacham from your own generation, even though a chacham for one's own generation maybe is only for paskening shailas, but not for a bracha, so tefillah. Nevertheless, in every generation, Chazal say that if you have a chayla b'toich beisa, you should ask a chacham to daven for you. So even though I don't even consider myself mechachmei hazman, I don't consider myself from the chacham of the generation. But since the chayla considers me a chacham, and the chayla should consider me that, so the chayla is following the advice of Pinchas ben Chama, and in the merit of the chayla believing in the words of Chazal, Hashem will accept my tefillah despite its unworthiness. And this is a good reason, Ladina, that people who consider me a chacham and ask me to daven, I'm mechuyev to daven for them. So you see, Reb Moshe, so to speak, is jumping through hoops to explain why it's okay for him to daven for other people when they ask him to daven for them. There's an interesting chidush in the Shiltas, in Shilta Tzadi Gimel, that if you're mevaker as a choyle, don't do it alone. Not like Reb Moshe said, the less people the better. There is a implication in the Shilta seems to say it's better to do it with others. The rugged shaver wants to bring a raya to the Shiltas from Parshas Vayechi. Yeah, Dr. Soroka, we were just at the rugged shaver together in Latvia, in Dvinsk. So the rugged shaver says a raya to be mevaker choyle with someone else. It says Vayhi acharei advar ma'ila Vayomer li Yosef hinei avicha choyle Vayikach eshnei banav imai es Menashe v'es Ephraim. That when he heard his father was sick, he took Menashe and Ephraim with him. That according to the Divrei HaShiltos, we understand after Yosef heard that Yaakov was sick, so he took somebody to go with him. Now we're going to discuss a very interesting question. We know that scientists believe in germs, and the microscope seems to believe in germs. Question, does halacha believe in germs? What is halacha? In other words, somebody is ill, and their disease is somewhat contagious, but you have a mitzvah bikur cholim. How do you reconcile bikur cholim with not catching the disease from the cholah? Do we need to be concerned about that? Does halacha recognize the possibility of becoming of a disease being contagious? So we have a tshuva in the Rama, in tshuva chaf. The shaila was Ruvain rented out a house to Shimon for a certain amount of time that Shimon could live in the house, and they made the kinyan, and there are no backs, nobody could back out. And before Shimon moved into the house, Shimon's wife came down with kadachas. In Ashkenaz it's called gelzucht. Basically, Shimon's wife is ill. And the Ramah says, even if you're going to say that the illness of the wife of the soicher is called an oines, certainly it's not an oines that it's roy to retract because of. Okay, what about the fact that it's contagious? Says Ramah, whoever thinks it's contagious is speaking nonsense. Someone who has anxiety says this. Hashem is the one who causes illness. Hashem is the roifei. And if the masker was correct, then there would never be a mitzvah bikur cholim. If there was an issue of contagious, how would you ever have a mitzvah of bikur cholim? When would you ever visit someone who is sick? You only visit somebody who has an injury, but not someone who has an illness? There's a mitzvah bikur cholim. That means halacha does not take germs into account. The proof is from the Gemara in Hamadir that the Gemara only recognizes a mum for a woman if it's epilepsy, which is a type of ra'asan. Other illnesses, we don't say that. And certainly this illness, which is most likely a product of stuffy air, which all the air in that city is stuffy. It's very common. Every house has this illness. So the maskir realized that it's a very likely possibility, and we say savar v'kibal. So therefore, even if the kinyan had not complete, nevertheless, if Shimon's wife has kadachas, Reuven has to let them live there. So the Tzitz Eliezer says, it seems that the Ramah holds that when it comes to bikur cholim, all we know is the words of Chazal. The Gemara only recognizes contagion by an illness called Balei Rasan, and all other illnesses, maybe you could make the case that halacha does not recognize the possibility of their being contagious. And the truth is, says the Tzitz Eliezer, we see many diseases that the doctors used to say were contagious, and now they know that it's not contagious at all, like epilepsy, that the Ramah said was contagious. And there are many illnesses, let's say what the Ramah is talking about with the kadachas. Today the doctors say it's not contagious. And even certain contagious diseases, they only say just be careful not to breathe in the same air as the chayla. So this is a question in halacha. Does a person have to, so to speak, compromise their own health to visit the chayla? So Tzitz Eliezer says maybe the Ramah holds that if Chazal did not explicitly exempt someone from bikur cholim, if there is a mitzvah bikur cholim, maybe we say mitzvah be'idna migna mitzvah. Maybe the zechus of the mitzvah protects you, and so to speak will secure that you won't become ill. In other words, maybe the Ramah is not so concerned for germs, and therefore the mitzvah, you have a right to rely on the protection of the mitzvah. The thing is, elsewhere, the Ramah definitely does recognize the danger of contagion. The Ramah in Siman Kuf Tezayin says that if there's some kind of dever in the city, you should run out of the city. Run out of the city as soon as the dever comes, don't wait till the end. And it's because of sakana. V'shomer nafsha yirchak mehem. You're not to rely on a miracle. You're not to put yourself in danger. By the way, Rabbi Kiva says, what's the Ramah's makar that there's something called germs? This week's Parsha. Rabbi Yehuda says, when Korach v'Adasai died, Rebbeinu Shalom says, Hi badlu mitoich ha'eda. Separate from the community. Hi badlu. Why? Says Rabbi Yehuda U'mashehitzuk lomer hi badlu. V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If the Israeli government could have targeted strikes, then God could also, I think. Yeah? If they're able to have pinpoint strikes, knock out one apartment in a building, so why can't Hashem just knock out Korach v'Adasai? No one else would be harmed. The answer is, we don't want germs, says Rabbi Meir, Kedei shelo yidbak behem ha'avir hara, shevemakas hadever, kinyan ha'amar be'ishtei shaloit, just like the wife of Lot, v'atabed ishtei me'achrav, and she got germs. You hear this? Rabbi Meir says when Lot's wife turned around, she contracted whatever illness the people of Sodom got. Anyway, there seems to be a little bit of a contradiction in the Ramah. Here, the Ramah says that if you rent out a house, then you don't, and the wife of the renter became ill, you still have to rent it out. Don't be concerned about germs. The proof is the mitzvah bikur cholim, because if you had to be concerned about germs, how would you ever be mavakar chola? And yet here the Ramah says if there's dever in the city, you have to run away. Now, what the Tzitz Eliezer said before could be a very good answer. The Ramah definitely acknowledges germs, but maybe the fulfillment of the mitzvah of bikur cholim would override that, and we would apply shomer mitzvah l'yeda davara. Or, says the Tzitz Eliezer, maybe the Ramah, when he was not concerned about germ, was talking about one individual, and it wasn't such a contagious disease. But if there's a disease which is rapidly spreading, of course the Ramah would agree that you're not to endanger yourself, and you have to guard yourself, like the Ramah paskins by the dever. However, the Shiur Knesset Agdola brings the Ramah, and he says the mitzvah bikur cholim, we do not differentiate between cholei magefa lecholim acherim, and it seems like the Knesset Agdola says if someone is ill, you visit them. Either contagious, Hashem will protect you. You know, that's what like Rabbi Aryeh Levine used to go to these very contagious cholim, and he really put his life in peril. However, the Tzitz Eliezer quotes Reb Chaim Falaji, who questions the Ramah very sharply, and he brings from many sources that if the Rama would have known the Rishonim about this, he would never have obligated somebody to put their life in even a suffix sakana to visit someone else. Again, this is a question in halacha. Halacha l'maisa, obviously, we don't endanger our health to be mekayim the mitzvah of bikur cholim. But again, a guy who has a cold or an ear infection, is it technically contagious? Yeah, but who doesn't? Everyone's carrying around some germs. You can't be a germaphobe. People walk around; they're still wearing masks. We're done with it. So a person has to live life and balance the importance of mitzvahs and balance the importance of preserving one's health. And kol chacham yasa b'das. You have to be able to evaluate when the chayla has only a minor illness, and if a person has a good immunity and they're not rubbing hands with the chayla and they're not breathing that air, and it's not a makam sakanas nefashos, so then there might be certain types of minor ailments that we apply. Shaimer mitzvah lo yeda davara. On the other hand, as great as bikur cholim is, it's not one of the 3 mitzvahs you have to give up your life for or jeopardize your life. So everyone has to act with chachma, bina, v'haskel. Okay, let's wrap this up. Because again, remember, Moshe Rabbeinu said the clincher of Moshe Rabbeinu said, what is the proof that ki Hashem shalachani? If Korach dies an unnatural death and no one is mavaker choila Korach, as if bikur cholim is the ultimate barometer whether Korach is correct or not. So let's go to another Gemara Nadarim. The Gemara Nadarim says on Daf Mem, Amarav, Amarav, Minayin shakadosh baruch hu zanes hachoila. How do I know God sustains the ill? Shenemer Hashem yisadenu al eres tavai. God will satiate on the sickbed. V'amaravin amarav minayin shashchina shruya lamala mimitasa shachoila. How do I know the Shechina resides above the bed of the choila? Shenemar Hashem yisadenu al eres tavai. Tanya nami hachi. Hanichnas levaker. So Hashem sustains the choila. Hashem's divine presence is above the bed of the choila. We learned in a brisa, if you enter to mevaker choila, don't sit on the bed, don't sit on a stool, don't sit on a chair. You wrap yourself, you sit on the floor. Mibnei shehashchina shruya lamala mimitasai shel choila shenemar Hashem yisadenu al eres tavai. This has halachic ramifications in Yardeh. We say in Siman Shin Lamed Hey, when you daven for a choila, if you're in the presence of the choila, you could daven in any language. You could daven in English, because the Shechina is there. But if you're not davening in the presence of the choila, only be mispalel b'lashon hakodesh. So we see that the fact that the Shechina is present with the choila has halachic ramifications. Therefore, says the Marsha in Madura Basra, Korach says to Moshe, I have no problem with Hashem. I get along with God. I believe Hashem created the world, and Hashem is mashgiach, and Hashem gave us the Torah. I love God. I don't like you. I say you made it up. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, really? You only have a problem with me? You don't have a problem with Hashem? Well, let's see. If you die a natural death, and people are mevaker choila, and the Shechina comes to visit you, and the Shechina sustains you, and the Shechina supports you, and the Shechina is lamala mirashoisav, then obviously you're good with Hashem, and you have a problem with me. But if God won't even give you the dignity of a natural death, and you're going to die unnaturally, and no one's mevaker choila you, because the Shechina is not lamala mirashoisav, and the Shechina doesn't sustain you, and the Shechina is not feeding you, then obviously you don't have beef with me only, then you have a problem with the Ribono Shel Olam himself. Says the Marsha, the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu made it dependent on bikur cholim, because bikur cholim shows a special relationship Hashem has with the choila. Take a look inside. Ulefi haGemara zu miyushav ki adas Korach amru. the community of Korach said, Ein lohem achloikis neged Hashem Yisbarach chalila. They have no problem with Hashem. Rak im Moshe, only with Moshe. The Efshir could be Zeh Kavanas HaPasuk, Ki Kol Ha'eda Kulam Kedoshim Uvesoicham Hashem Ratzaloymar. Kol Ha'eda, the whole community, Kulam Kedoshim, they're all holy, the Chasidim Besoicham, and they're righteous among them, Ratzaloymar B'toich Leiv Kol Echad, in the heart of all of them, Yesh Hashem, Ein Lem Shum Achloikis Im Hashem, Hashem's Bekirbam, Achim Choyesh Machloikis, we only have a problem with you, Al Sha'atem Izgoyim Al Kal Hashem Eyatzmechem, you're arrogant over the community of Hashem. Al Zehi Misramim. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, Amar Moshe, Bezois Teidon, if your problem is only with us, or is your problem with Hashem, you know what the proof is? Ufekudas kol ha'adam. Like the Gemara says, Hashem is soyed the chayla. Hashem is zon the chayla. Hashem is l'mala mirashoysav shel chayla. That's why when you daven for the chayla in their presence, you can do it in any language. Then if there's bikur chaylim, you'll see that Hashem didn't send me because Hashem's with you. But if you're swallowed by the ground and you're never ill, so because Hashem doesn't want to bother with you, because Hashem doesn't want to look at you, then that's a proof that this machloikis is not just against me, but you are disputing the very authority of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we see the great power of the mitzvah of bikur cholim, the great koyach, the importance of tefillah when it comes to bikur cholim. That davening for cholah is one of, if not the most important part of the mitzvah. And we also learn the great power of tefillah and brachos of every single Jew. Because even if 1 million people visited the cholah, you have an obligation to visit the cholah. Why me? Because as New York Lotto says, hey, you never know. Maybe it's your tefillah that can make the difference. Okay, Rebbeinu Shem should give everyone gezint, good health, arichas yamim v'shanim, and Hashem should bring refuah to all the Cholei Yisrael. Shkoyach, have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Recording stopped.